Hello, my name is Nicole Urbanik, and today my topic is Flint water crisis. The people of Flint, Michigan have been turning on their faucets and showers for over 2 years with no surprise to see discolored water. Since 2014, Flint has been suffering to restore their water system. Thousands of angry citizens have been in a constant protest since the intoxicated water initiated itself into their faucets. The water has been poisoned with lead and has been consumed by most of their population, which has affected the health of Flint's people, mainly the children. Researchers from Virginia Tech have performed a study on the water to find a rise of lead levels. The initial cause of this catastrophic was when Flint switched their water systems from the Detroit water system to the Flint River. Mona Hanna Antista states in her article regarding the Flint water crisis that the aging Flint water distribution center contains a high percentage of lead pipings and lead plumbing, which estimates the lead service lines ranging from 10% to 80%. Antista then gives some background on the lead and goes on to say lead is a potential neurotoxin which can take a serious effect on children. Adults have been affected as heavily as the children of Flint have been. There have been 87 cases of Legionnaires' disease from June 2014 to November 2015 within Genesee County of Flint. Out of the 87 cases, 10 of them have lost their lives. Governor Rick Snyder of Flint called a state of emergency January 12th of this year, which then the National Guard visited and distributed hundreds of thousands of water bottles to the suffering city. Following the first announcement of emergency, President Obama declared the federal state of emergency 4 days later on January 16th. The crisis in Flint is the outcome of the Vulnerable Act passed 68 years ago. In 1948, the Federal Water Pollution Control Act was enacted. This act was aimed in the restoration and management of the chemical and physical integrity of this country's water. Less than 10 years later, the act was revised. The states and localities were granted the total of $500 million for the construction of possible wastewater treatment, Clean Water Act timeline. At this time, the amendment authorized the federal government to contact state and local authorities in an act of emergency across the state lines. Federal government was nudging at increasing their power with broaden their enforcement within this act. By 1961, the federal government expanded their support of the state and population control. Forwarding another 10 years, the government has only increased in their interstate commerce. Since the passing of the Control Act, the Supreme Court has had a great impact on the recurring struggles of the water systems. Court cases such as Rapinos versus United States as a result resulted in unprotected water. Reportedly, John Rapino sought to fill 3 wetland areas on his property to be able to build a shopping center. 4 justices refused to protect any body of water that is not relatively permanent, standing, or flowing. 4 other justices were supporting the act as it already had 30 years of broad interpretation of water protection. This was a split decision that has kept the country in confusion and water constantly polluted, which leads to the question I'm interested in answering throughout my research. Has the increase of federal government control caused Water Control Act to suffer within the states? It took 2 years for Governor Snyder to call a state of emergency, and then 4 years later to become a federal known issue. Since January, the only progress made from the government is in providing bottled water to the citizens of Flint. The problem has been drawn out too long without any serious action to fix the pipelines and make it lead-free. This isn't the first time a dilemma has arisen in the act of the Water Control Act. In 1969, a fire rose in Chattanooga River in Cleveland, Ohio. The water that flowed throughout the river was so polluted that it caught fire. In the article by Chaganoa River, Lee R. Sugarat explains that the cause of the fire was undetermined, but investigators pointed to the discharge of highly volatile petroleum diverted as a possible cause. Although the actual cause is undefined, the fire wasn't sought to be unexpected. The evidence collected was enough to point to blame the river's pollution. The Cleveland mayor at this time, Carl Stokes, knew that this well-established condition had to be brought to an end. The river fire became an example as to why there is a need for support in keeping the water clean. In 1972, the Clean Water Act, a branch off of the Water Pollution Control Act, was established and passed, which became responsible for the correction of this problem. A better explanation of the Clean Water Act was written by R. W. Kappa Jr. Cap explains how equipped permits for discharge of pollutants into navigable water, provided enforcement mechanisms, and authorized funding for wastewater treatment works, construction grants to states, to tribes for their water quality programs. If this law was still in place, then why aren't Flint systems checked before running water through their systems? As Hannah Ashtia stated in her article related to the lead of health issues, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency regulates lead in public water supplies, which consequently hasn't been the case for Flint. Lead consumption from drinking water has always been an issue in the EPA's study. The EPA estimates that up to 20% of our exposure to lead comes from drinking water. The study is initialized in 1991. If the EPA stated there was an issue with lead levels, why hasn't the federal government come up with a more elaborate plan on water systems across the states? I believe the more power the federal government has been granted, the more the states stepped back in resolving their issues. In 2010, an oil spill occurred in the Gulf of Mexico, which was within Obama's term of presidency. Right when the leaks took place, the EPA and the Interior of Homeland Security acted quickly to fix the issue. Obama claims that they worked aggressively to resolve the issue of the Gulf, were using every resource available to stop the oil from coming ashore and the damages it could cause. Quoted in President Obama's remarks. This differs from the other articles I have reviewed, as Obama had quickly acted to control the issue of the clean oil from the Gulf of Mexico. Although the Flint crisis is not as serious as an oil spill, citizens' lives are at stake as they are in taking poisoned water. If Obama and all the other protective organizations can act so fast on an oil spill, why can't they act fast for a city suffering without lead-free water to drink? In history of water pollution within the United States goes as far back as 1899, when Congress adopted the Rivers and Harbor Act in order to prohibit any discharge that would interfere with rivers. Over 100 years later, and the Environmental News Service has reported how more than 62% of industrial and multidisciplinary facilities across the country discharge more pollution into the U.S. waterways than their Clean Water Act permits. The timeline of acts passed and events dealing with water pollution obviously shows the lack of seriousness in regulating waters and sticking true to policies created to deal with. In conclusion, since the passing Water Pollution Control Act, there has been several outbreaks, large and small, that have to deal with water pollution. Considering the fire outbreak in the Chenango River due to their heavy amount of water pollution and the federal power, water should stay clean. According to the 4 articles I have researched, the acts to control water pollution continue to be hard to endeavor. Help for Flint is long overdue, and past events would predict that there is still a long road ahead for its citizens. Federal government has quickly to revive the Gulf from the oil spill, as they should have done. But for the citizens struggling to bathe, craving hydration, and remaining in the state of emergency after 2 years of lead consumption, there hasn't been enough done for their cause. Revisiting my initial research question, has an increase in federal government control caused the Water Control Act to suffer within the states? It is hard to say whether the government has neglected the states at risk, but it would be more beneficial to practice state control in this situation. History has repeated itself. It's important to maintain our water systems as water is one of the most important things for us to consume. Over 100 years of dealing with this pollution, and there is still a need for structure and better consideration for the environment's true destruction.